And I know that in a way you need that list of banned books in order to fight it, in order to make an appeal. You know, you have to have some official channel. But we're in this like tough spot where so far we bring in books in, you know, we bring the library van out to the jail and we bring in a bunch of cardboard boxes on a bi-monthly basis. And we put them through the metal detector, and no one is actually looking at each book, and they're sort of trusting that the public library will follow the rules, and we want to keep it that way. So I was just curious to hear from you all around, you know, like, has that model ever been talked about? Like, I know that most of the Books to Prisons programs are responding to individual requests and sending individual books. But I am curious to hear if there is ever an undefined censorship policy. Where do you go from there? Because that's the spot that we're in at the moment. So that's it for me, and I'm going to pass it over to Jeanie.
So we can go to the next slide, and I'm just going to, sorry, everybody. Talk a little bit about what we've been doing in San Francisco and kind of bounce off of some of the things that Sarah just mentioned. So as I said, our program's fairly new. It comes out of, there's only 2 of us who are librarians that are involved with it in San Francisco. And it comes out of work that we've each done independently of each other. So my supervisor was the Juvenile Detention Center librarian in San Francisco, still is, although now the Juvenile Detention Center will be closing within the next 2 years. And she's been there for over a decade. And my background is a bit more academic. I was a juvenile detention center librarian on and off for 6 or 7 years. And then I earned my PhD from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And all of my doctoral research was about how libraries can better serve youth who are targeted by the state. So really thinking beyond just the institutionalization, the kind of like the institutions that we think of when we think of incarceration, into more carceral practices. Like, how does policing happen in the US? How is policing, like really racialized policing, how does that play out in our own library? And so as I was finishing my doctoral research, that was when the library decided that it was time to go ahead with this program. My supervisor, Rachel Kennan, had been pushing for it for a really, really long time. And really, her experience is what got us over the initial hurdles of getting our service started. There was a lot of general mistrust and dis-ease in the Sheriff's Department and among other programs that were providing services for people who were in the San Francisco jails. And a lot of that is because there are so many programs that have really big ideas that want to come in and do something and then are unreliable and fall out. Still, after 2 years, I have patrons who are, if I take a day off, concerned that I'm getting fired. So there's just so much turmoil that happens that has such a huge impact on the lives of people inside that it's really difficult to form a relationship that works well. And for us, the fact that the first time we walked down a line in one of the jails, a number of young men who are now in their early 20s were so extremely thrilled to see Rachel, that it kind of gave us this concrete, we know how to be librarians in this type of environment. And that was our immediate kind of trust building that we did with the Sheriff's Department. And that trust matters in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about how it's not complete in any ways in just a second. But just to introduce what we do, we see about 1,300 to 1,400 people every month. Many of the people we see more than once a month. We try to see, there's 3 county jails, so we go to each jail Monday through Wednesday. And we try to see people who are in the most restrictive housing as frequently as we can. So we see people who are in administrative segregation, solitary, and lockup, usually every other week. And then we see people who are in medical facilities, so who are in a lockdown medical or who are under psych observation, and aren't allowed to have really objects or even clothing. We try to see them every week as we can. And getting to do that, especially with people who are in the psych observation, has been a really big deal for us because we weren't allowed to do it for about the first year and a half. now we can actually take in-person requests from them, and we leave their book with psych staff who turn the books over to them. But it's really a huge success for us. We're really thankful for it. None of the jails in San Francisco one of the jails in San Francisco was built with the idea that there might be a library. But for the most part, we don't actually have a library space. We, in one of the jails, use a closet to store our books, in another, a hallway that's in a programming area. And in one of the jails that had a library that maybe could have been a space people were coming to, we use that as a storage room, but no one's actually allowed to come into that room. There's security concerns for the sheriff's department, and then there's also staffing concerns because people have to be moved with staff. And what that means for us is, like New York Public, we push a book cart around a lot. So our book cart holds usually about 250 pounds of book, or 250 books, not pounds. It feels like that sometimes. And we reload it between the different units that we go to depending on the jail that we're in. And what's really great about that is that it means we get to do very direct service. So in lockdown pods, we go door to door, cell to cell, to see our patrons. We pass books through the ports to them. We take their requests through these little tiny ports where you talk. And then we also go into some of the open living cells where people are actually allowed to come down to the book cart and get to, there's the whole socialization that happens around looking for a book with other people. It's really amazing to get to sponsor that. For us, in thinking about censorship, I hope one day we're able to just bring boxes of books into the jail, but our process is not so much around individual titles, although I'll talk about a few examples we've encountered. It's more about this extensive process we go through to get our books in. So we have a nice healthy budget, which means we get to buy a lot of books that our patrons recommend, which means our patrons tend to, across the board, get the kinds of books that they want. But the Sheriff's Department has set up a process for us where we buy our books, we process them the way we do. We don't track who has books checked out, specific titles. We actually just stamp them with our stamp, and the jail's rule is that people can have 2 books at a time. So we encourage people to share books with our stamp, because if we don't see somebody, some of our patrons, we don't see it for every 3 weeks. And so we want people to be able to pass the books around to each other without a fear of repercussions, especially since so much of what's structured for them inside of the jail is around the potential of repercussions. We really encourage more of a fostering of library culture and of book culture. So after we stamp our books, we bend them, and a K-9 unit comes to our space, which is outside of any of the jails, once a week, and the K-9 searches all of our bins of books. Then they're all sealed while the K-9 unit is there, and we bring them into the individual jails, and each of the jails has its own screening policies. So in one of them, as long as they see us bring in the sealed bins, they'll open them for us, and then we have access to our books. In another, we have to run all of our sealed bins also through an X-ray machine to get them in, and then we unseal our own bins after that. And in the third, we bring them in a few days before service, and then somebody on staff flips through every single book to make sure there's no contraband, and then we have our books by the next time we do service. So you can imagine there can be a few kinks that come up in that detailed of a process. Very rarely have we had any challenges. We have a challenge policy that mirrors the public library's challenge policy, which is cumbersome in some ways because it allows for a 6-week review. All of that to say there's formal and informal ways that materials get censored inside of an institution. And so we've had, we'll have staff from the Sheriff's Department who are really supportive of our collection and who read some of the same things, or we've had staff that are really critical of our collection or the fact that library service is even happening. For us, we're fortunate that in the 70s in San Francisco, there were a lot of political actions that were taken by people who were incarcerated to push for better conditions. So the Sheriff's Department actually has its own program staff that are civilians that aren't deputized, who exist basically to advocate for people who are incarcerated. And each facility has somebody like that. So when we've had any challenges that have been more severe, we've had that partner to turn to who's already on the inside and is established. The only real book we've been told, don't bring that book in here, or that author in here, are Robert Greene books, and that was only in one of the jails. I don't know if you all are familiar with him, but he wrote 48 Laws of Power, 33 Strategies of War, Art of Seduction. He's a really, really well-known author. People inside are really excited about his books, and he's also read by a lot of people who are, you know, strategic CEOs. So I think it depends on who's reading it, how his books get framed. But while we were told, okay, don't bring this author into this jail, which we haven't, many of our patrons move between the jails as part of just jail process, and so might end up in a facility where then they're able to access that title. But we also know, because we've looked at the libraries on the in the pods where there are a few people who have the readers, and they're not a Kindle and they're barely a tablet, but the electronic reading machine, that Robert Greene is in that library that they can access for free if they're in a programming pod with access to the tablets. So I think that's also something you all probably experience a lot with books to prisoners, is that these censorship decisions can vary a lot facility to facility and are maybe not always enforced along the lines of the book ban. And that's just kind of I feel like that's a little bit different for us, is that we have a much more intimate relationship with the Sheriff's Department because they're so involved in screening our books and often have a lot of physical contact with our books. We're also always escorted by a deputy while we're doing our library service. So there's always somebody from the Sheriff's Department who is watching what's happening around our book cart, looking over the book cart, etc. I mean, our program's awesome. It's great. It's so important for our patrons. But we've realized, you know, there are things we can't buy. There are things that either are cost prohibitive, that are too niche of an interest, that if you were in the public, you could just go to the public library if you were out and pick up, but that we can't afford because we have to budget. So we've adopted, and we did this from the beginning, New York Public Library's reference by mail model, which really is just a way that people who are incarcerated, for us from the Midwest to the West Coast, for New York Public Library from the Midwest to the East Coast, can write into our libraries, and there's a formalized process for responding to their request. So this is increasingly, I think, especially over the last 15 or so years, become a much more needed kind of service for people who are inside. Because if you think about your own information access, and when I think about my own, or even how we're having this meeting, so much of it is mediated by technology and specifically by the internet. And many of our patrons, you know, there's two things that happen. Either our patrons are much younger and that's how they're used to accessing most of their information, or our patrons are much older and they haven't really had any interaction with the kinds of technology worlds and information worlds that we live in this moment. And so reference by mail helps to mediate both of those circumstances. Increasingly, too, you all might have noticed, information that would have been published in a book or in a magazine is now only published online. So isn't available in print even to mail in the first place. What we do, librarians from San Francisco Public Library System, and we work with several different library school classrooms so that students have a different idea of thinking about their patron bases and are more familiar with doing reference by mail as a kind of work, thinking about information worlds with people who are incarcerated as part of their library education, is we get the letters sent to our department. We now get about 80 letters a month. It used to be 60 a week, excuse me. We get a lot, sometimes up to 100 a week. And our respondents will send in up to 10 pages printed front and back of research and information, often information from the internet, to our patrons. In addition to that, just because I feel like I've been kind of getting rambly, we do reentry support, which for the most part for us is linking people to resources in the library that are useful to them, which we know because we surveyed our patrons before we started service, and we continuously revise that guide from conversations we've had with our patrons. And we also connect them to resources in the community. So there's a reentry council actually in San Francisco. It's a government council that I sit on, and they put out reentry guides, much like Connections. And a lot of those are informed by the real experiences of people who have been incarcerated, although they're often filtered through adult probation and other organizations. finally, on the library side of just kind of information building, we have started a group with California Library Association to get more, just to build awareness among librarians that this is a type of service that they can be providing. California has one of the highest per capita incarceration rates in the United States, which is saying a lot when you think about what the United States incarceration rate is. I've heard that that 10% of the prison population is held, of the US, is held in California. So there's a huge need, not just in the Bay Area, which is very populous, but across the state, for there to be more support for people who are incarcerated here. We can move to my next slide. Thanks. So this is just a little preview of what we've done. Part of what we do also, we have a lot of institutional support, but we really want the public to be aware of what we're doing. So we have pursued having more documentation in media of what we do. And so this is an example of that. This was a local paper story about what we're doing. This room looks like a library that people can go into. That's our friend Mark, he's very tall. And Shanika, she's a great author. But it's actually just the room where we store our books. And it was set up for this photo shoot to look a little bit more accessible. So you can see it's very jail, even though it's not as jail as some of our jails. The oldest jail that we go into is still a bars and tanks kind of jail. So people are no, that's not right. People are 9 to 10 to a tank. And it's just kind of an open air space with bars on the front and then tank down the line. So this is one of the more modern jails in San Francisco. And you can go to the next shot too, which is about reference by mail. Next slide. This is an article from CNET about reference by mail if you're interested in learning more about it. We completely cribbed this from New York Public Library, and they deserve all of the credit for it. I did some research looking back into how long it's been happening. And even in the early 80s when New York was starting their inside library service, while I don't think it was happening through the mail, there are newspaper articles that say like, and provide reference services to people inside. So New York really was the forerunner, in my opinion, of doing this kind of work, and especially in creating reference by mail as a program. We know many librarians receive letters that are requests for information all across the United States. And I know from talking to them, to many librarians about it, that those questions are usually pretty pressing. But I also know librarians who don't have a system for this are really confused about what to do sometimes, and that many of those letters either get haphazardly answered or don't get answered at all because librarians are afraid that they don't understand what it's possible to send into a prison, how information works, and they're afraid of sending in something that will just get either sent back or that will somehow implicate the library system. So I wonder, and we'll get to a moment just where we want more feedback from you all, how, if there's a way that you could better support librarians, and also how we can better support you in the work that we're doing, but we'll get there in just a second. I did want to talk more about that raising public awareness that Sarah ended with. I was thinking about the book group. One of the things that we really do is we want to do two things. We want to recognize that people who are coming into the library are impacted by incarceration. Many of our patrons have been incarcerated at some point in their lives, or their family members have, or their communities experience really intense levels of policing. And I think it's very rare, actually, in my own experience as a librarian, that that's something that librarians are considering. And we've been trying to think through more ways to acknowledge that and to invite people in. So one of the things we do is that the reentry flyer that we have, that we pass out to people inside when we hear that they're getting out, is also available at all of our branch libraries. And it's just this very, and I don't think it's an incredible gesture, but it's at least something to acknowledge from the library's end that people are experiencing incarceration. And I think especially in this moment where the discussion is about mass incarceration, it's much more rare to find people who aren't directly impacted by systems of incarceration. But as we know, everyone is implicated. in the way that policing and incarceration happens in the United States. Either people are targeted by it or they're benefiting from it. So this is a concern, I think, for our general public. And part of what we've done around that is a number of public programs. We did a series of film screenings. We showed Life After Life, which is about people who have been incarcerated for a long time returning back into their community, just a documentary that follows them around. We showed a film about the feminist group, the Feminists on Cell Block Y, that was formed by men who are incarcerated, who were incarcerated, where she's out now, and a few other people are out, to really talk about how toxic masculinity hurt them. And that film's incredible. If you haven't seen it, it's really beautiful. It's really in-depth. We've shown films around the experiences of trans youth of color with policing and trying to find a way just to be in the world generally. And we've also worked with another of other community groups to raise awareness outside of the library, that it doesn't all need to be programs that are inviting people in, but the library is also able to go out and have these conversations as part of the community. I think at this point, the only thing I've missed is that I also do a weekly group that's a media and representation group through the educational program in the jails, which is called 5 Keys. And that group is specifically with people in San Francisco. There's a transgender and gender nonconforming pod. So that group is specifically for trans and gender nonconforming people. And we've made sure that we have a really robust collection of books and other materials for them, because when we first started coming in to do service, even though that pod had been established for many years at that point, the closest representative material that we found was Chuck Palahniuk's Monster. And they're really, you know, the way that policing works is really apparent once you walk inside of a jail. And the way that policing has shaped the lives of people, especially in that pod, works also through a lack of representation, a lack of access to information, a lack of just, you know, some kind of reflection and validity. So that's something that we're really proud to be able to do. Thanks for listening to me just kind of go on. Go to the next slide. So we want to hear from you. Have you worked with librarians? What do you think librarians can do better for you? Do you have any questions for us?
Can I jump in and add one last thing? I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that it is an interesting position that we're in, working for the public library and doing this work. And we've had interesting experiences with the librarians who work for the prisons, and not always positive experiences. And it sounded like a little earlier in the day, some folks were echoing that sentiment. And it is a really interesting relationship. I mean, Jeanie and I are both working in jails where they're, oh, I don't know what's going on with my, like, let's see. Can you hear me normal now?
No.
Oh.
You sound sort of like Daft Punk. Very robotic. She's working on it, so. She typed in the chat box that she was curious to hear about your experiences with any librarians, those who work in the facility or public librarians. I mean, you can either, speak and we can unmute you, or, definitely use the chat.
Hey, this is Michelle from Books to Prisoners, Seattle. If this is just sort of a general question about experiences with any librarians who work in prison facilities, I feel very lucky to be here in Washington because we have a system of prison librarianship that is actually distinct from the DOC. So a lot of the prison librarians have a lot more autonomy in their ability to select and present materials to people who are incarcerated, as well as to work with nonprofits like us, and oftentimes I think end up becoming more active advocates of our programs as a result, because they aren't as strictly controlled by the DOC. And I don't think, unfortunately, that that is common in other systems, except for perhaps as outlined by Sarah and Jeanie for California, where there seems to be some good collaboration as well. But I just don't have the information to know if that's common in other places.
Okay, that just totally sounded like someone was locked in the trunk, which I hope is not the case.
Oh, Michelle, you just have a question from Sarah asking if they work, the librarians. Who do the librarians work for? Do they work for Seattle Public Library?
Oh, my apology. No, these are facility libraries. I might have misread the question. We do, however, have a new initiative at the Seattle Public Library that works with the King County Jail to get books, or to get books for them to read to children.
That's awesome. I mean, I'll say I'm really glad to be a librarian who works for a public library and goes into a local jail, especially because it's so obvious that people who are inside of the local jail in San Francisco are part of the community served by the library. I won't speak about any specific librarians for correctional departments or DOC, although I think, Michelle, what you're talking about is that it's true. Most DOC, Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, etc., librarians who work for them are hired by the system. They're not working for an agency outside of the system. But my own research looking at the kinds of materials that are available for librarians who are going into that profession, or classes that are going into that, who are specifically that are focused on prison librarianship specifically, is that they tend to really take the position of the prison as something that's normal and legitimate, and the prison librarian's role is to enforce those standards. And I've seen that also in memoirs by prison librarians, of which there are quite a few, is this kind of, this suspicion of patrons, or this like really dehumanizing often approach to patrons, when, especially in writings by prison librarians, when they're writing their own life as this novel or as a story, tend to position our library patrons as a side part of the story, and often pretty theatrically. But even the research itself is much more like, suspect your patrons of having contraband. In some instances, books are contraband because it's too many books. And even that language of thinking about a book as contraband, I think, is very different for librarians who don't work within those systems. I've even, in brief conversations with instructors on library services to prisons, had a librarian use the phrase, or an instructor for future librarians in prisons use the phrase serving the undeserving, which is just a completely different approach than people who don't work within those systems, I think, would have, and public librarians that I know who do this kind of work have. So I think that, I mean, all of that said too, I also talk to prison librarians who are so severely underfunded in their resources that they're coming from Southern California, driving for hours and hours and hours in their own personal vehicles to come up to San Francisco to get materials that have been withdrawn from our library system since we're so well funded. And I do think that there's librarians who are inside that are passionate about the work, but are really, you know, facing institutional barriers in ways that make their positions really, really difficult.
It looks like we have a question from Sarah Georgie. She says, I have a question, inappropriate. The Dear Fellow Reader program sounds awesome. Can you say a little bit more about how you coordinate having library read the same books at the same time as the page on the inside?
I'm gonna give my microphone another shot here. Is this sounding bad still?
No, this is perfect.
Okay, great. So what we do is we use the budget for our department to buy a set of books. We buy 12 books, so we can have up to 12 people in the book club, or more if they're willing to share. And if the library has enough copies, the branch staff might use regular copies that are in the collection and just put 12 copies on hold and have them all sent to one branch. Usually these are branches where there's a regular book club that already meets, but in some cases we've done it as a one-off. And when we read the book together in the prison, the library patrons at the community branch, they know that this is sort of upcoming. And so then when they meet for the first time to discuss the book, they already have the letters from our incarcerated patrons in their hands. And so they can reflect on those as they have their conversation about the book. And then they take time at the end of their book club session to write response letters, and I bring them in. Everything is just first name basis, and we don't encourage continued correspondence just because it would require a different approval process from the prison. The federal prisons are actually pretty strict about correspondence, and so we keep it like one-to-one, just to make it more easily replicable. And if the public library collection doesn't include enough copies of the same title, then I'll just get the books back from my patrons and send them over to the branch so that they can read them as a group too. And it's been really great. And we've read a couple books that have prison in the story somehow, or, you know, as part of the topic. But we've also read books that have nothing to do with prison. And so, you know, people who are in prison don't always want to read about prison, of course. But we have read, you know, for instance, the Beale Street Could Talk. There's certainly a lot about prison in there. And then we also read the Reuben Hurricane Carter book called The 16th Round, a boxer who wrote his memoir about his prison experience. And then we've read a few other books. We read, gosh, wow, I'm really forgetting the name of this book, about Osage County and Killers of the Flower Moon, about the birth of the CIA and the way that oil and money resources were stolen from a Native community in Osage County. So that was another book we read for that program, and we did that one at a couple different branch locations. Sure.
Do we have any more questions or comments or observations? Well, thank you for your very in-depth and thoughtful presentation. I definitely learned more than I ever would have learned from any other course concerning what you do and the connections with the public library.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. If you, I'm starting a loop.
Okay. We are now going to our next presentation. Andy, are you on the phone?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, that's great. How's my volume and stuff?
I still have my eardrums. I'm speaking for myself. I'm actually wearing a headset, so.
yeah, me too. But I can't hear me, so maybe that's actually good. Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Chan, as you can see from the first slide. Oh, I guess I should ask Erin or whoever is running the slides. I just indicate to you when I want the slide to go forward, or?
Yes, just
okay.
say next slide.
Okay, there's not using PowerPoint that much. I've thrown in sort of like little things because it's like, oh, look what this does and things like that. So you'll have to bear with me that not every time that you click will a new slide come up. Something else will just happen, and everybody will already have seen these kind of things because everybody uses PowerPoint so much more than I do, I think. Anyway, so yeah, I'm Andy Chan from Books to Prisoners in Seattle. And today I'm talking about, excuse me, the resisting the Washington state book ban. And we're going to cover a little bit about book bans in general, how to respond to them, or what seems to be effective ways of responding to them, and the actual history of what happened in Washington this year. I know that probably quite a few people online right now are fairly aware of things, but for the sake of folks who were not intimately involved, I'm taking a fairly basic approach, and then sort of towards the end, if people have want to get into more complex questions, we can certainly do that. And I think Michelle from BTP is also online, because she is definitely more into the whole social media aspect of things, and so she could at some point in time, maybe towards the end, pipe up and sort of like go and just say how important the social media aspect of things were, although I will try and emphasize that a little bit. Okay, so let's see. Let's go on to the next slide, please. Oh, there we go. So what actually happened in March of 2019? This is all fairly fresh and new for folks who don't know what happened. Is that, yeah, we do keep fairly good track of packages of books when they get returned to us. And we started noticing sometime in late March that we were getting returns from 1 or 2 high requesting prisons. And this was kind of strange. I'll go into why in a couple of slides time, but we started making some inquiries and looking in the DOC website for anything. I think someone actually tried to contact these specific prisons to see what was happening. And one of our members, I think actually Michelle, who's online, dug deep enough into the Washington Department of Corrections website to find this memo, which is on the screen right now. It was dated from March the 12th, and it talked about a new policy that the Assistant Secretary of Prisons, Robert Herzog, known as the Punisher, had written up and was going into effect in March 25th, basically to say that the DOC was banning all used books from non-profit vendors effective March 25th. I mean, this was certainly a surprising find, and it was particularly surprising as these prisons had clearly already instituted this memo before its actual start date of March the 25th, because we were getting returned sometime in late March, which meant that they received the package probably very close to whenever, March the 12th, when the memo was sent out. So that's interesting, and they were like super excited in the mail rooms to get this instituted. And we saw this, and we thought, well, I probably can't swear, but oh dear, we thought that's not good. What are we going to do about that? And obviously, this is not something in isolation. Can we have the next slide, please? And it's a short, so this is a short history of book bans in the United States prison system. Can I have the next click, please? It's really long. I'm not going to go into all of the book ban stuff, but can I have the next click, please? Yeah. So I'm the person at Books Prisoners in Seattle who basically updates our restrictions list every week, and I essentially have done so since 1995, which, if people count back, means that I've been doing this for quite a long time. And I actually do have restrictions on that list from my predecessor, so from before 1995, and it was pretty extensive. Even my memory of it, it was a pretty extensive list of restrictions. And most people probably know what the restrictions, or what possible restrictions are, but for those who don't, things like not allowing hardbacks, no used books, the particular vendor has to be authorized, so only Barnes and Noble or only Amazon is allowed to send in. A prison can request prior approval, which means that they need to know what either they need to know what the titles of what you're going to send in are before you send them in, or the person needs to be approved to get the books, any books in the first place. Some prisons don't allow prisoners to get books for free, and some have this unusual rule that the books must come from a publisher. This is really tough because, of course, most publishers don't send out books. They use distributors, so it's kind of like that doesn't really fit. Anyway, as I said, these various restrictions and book bans come up from time to time, but it was 2018 was, let's call it a banner year for new types of book bans. And I honestly don't know that when I say that it was a banner year, that I say that because these were, you know, so like new, like, you know, suddenly everybody's deciding to do that. Maybe it's a little bit like that. Or maybe, you know, sort of like the prison book program folk just decided to act as, you know, more of an entity in response to when things have come up. And of course that the email listserv that the prison book programs have used has been around for quite a while now. I think it got started in the early 2000s, I should know. But this was, 2018 was a year in which there was a concerted response to statewide changes in states which had active prison book programs. The first one I should note is New York. That happened, I think things started to come down at the, oh look, I have video. Oh, there I am. Hello. I might put my sticky thing back on there if it distracts me. Yeah, so in January, around the end of 2017, and really noticeably in January 2018, the DOC instituted a policy that only allowed a certain number of approved vendors. So it's like 6 vendors, I think. And there was quite the outcry, and eventually Governor Cuomo, sort of took an executive action to tell the Department of Corrections to rescind the policy. Then in the spring of 2018, the Federal Bureau of Prisons decided to institute a ban of, I think it was all books from prison book programs, and to use, again, some high price commissary contractors of some sort to provide books for folks. In the fall of 2018, one of the big ones that hopefully everybody has heard about was a ban in Pennsylvania, and that was a really, I mean, incredibly egregious act in which, and again, somebody's going to correct me exactly what happened, but essentially they closed down the mailing system. And when they reopened the mailing system, the rule was that no letters could go directly to prisoners. They all were going to go to a central clearinghouse in Florida, so that the prisoners would never see the actual letters or cards or photographs from their loved ones, friends, family. These would be scanned, and then the prisoners would get some kind of scan of this. And in terms of books, they were not going to allow books in from any non-profit vendors. What they were going to do instead was that prisoners were going to be allowed and encouraged to have e-readers of some sort, which I don't think we would necessarily be opposed to, except that the prisoners were going to have to buy these e-readers, and these e-readers were expensive ones from a Department of Corrections contractor, you know, not valued, but they're costing about $150, and the books were going to be some exorbitant price, much higher than you would be able to get on the high street. And of course, this is for folks who might be getting paid 10, 16 cents an hour. So in order to even get an e-reader, it could take months and months and months and months. And you're not even using your funds, your commissary funds, for the toothbrush or the underwear or the other things that you have to buy. So it was particularly egregious. There was a big campaign that the folks in the Pennsylvania prison book program I can't remember what name is it Books Through Bars? Anyway, they were central to that, and got it overturned. So getting back to Washington, our state's been an interesting one because it's a very liberal state, but it does have a fairly long history of restricting books. Back when I first started the Books to Prisoners, there was only one prison in Washington which allowed used books. And so we couldn't even send used books into our own prisons. We'd made various inquiries and stuff over the years, but in 2008, we decided to do kind of like a really concerted campaign to get it changed. And this was led by churches in Olympia. And it was really helped that they had a personal connection to the then secretary of the Department of Corrections. And so they managed to wangle some direct communications with him. Nevertheless, even with that personal connection, it took around 3 years of discussions followed by a trial in 2 low security prisons to get to a point where the director, the secretary said, okay, we're going to allow used books in Washington state prisons. The small print on that was that the superintendent of each individual prison was going to be able to make the choice about whether or not to allow used books. So we found in 2011 and 2012 that most of the Washington state prisons started to allow used books, and there was a couple of holdouts who were really concerned about security. And it wasn't all in high security prisons, although one of the main ones was at Walla Walla, Washington State Prison, with a particular mailroom sergeant who really, we had conversation, phone calls with him and stuff, and he was absolutely adamant that there was just absolutely no way that Books to Prisoners would be able to send in used books. But anyway, the general drift was really good. So like over the years, 2013, 2014, more and more of the little prisons started to allow used books. And then there was a kind of a lull. And then in 2017, we had one prison start refusing books, but that was it until spring of 2019, which is when the memo came out. And we were suddenly surprised to find, hey, we can't get used books into our prisons. And for folks, again, who may not be entirely familiar with prison book programs, there are very few ways for prison book programs to have good selections of new books. All of the prison book programs essentially work on shoestring budgets. So we don't have budgets typically to buy new books. And it really, even if we did, we'd have to be able to buy books on every single subject and basically have an entire library of new books. And it's incredibly frustrating. And again, I know from experience when we did a lot more, new books requests, that you'd go to the shelves and try and find a new book on anything even close to what someone was looking for, and would not be able to find anything. And so eventually you just always go back to the default of some, terrible self-published novel, because there was no alternative for someone. So instituting a ban on used books is essentially instituting a ban on prison book programs, essentially. Okay, so can I have the next slide, please? And click again. Yes. So as everybody, well, not everybody, there's Kubler-Ross has these 5 stages of grief, but we in the prison book program have 5 stages, 5 elements of resistance. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, fact finding. When you are faced with a prison book ban or restriction, it's really crucial to know as much as you can, even before you really start doing anything. So there's a number of different ways of doing that. The top ones are using the good old internet, and also making direct contacts with the Department of Corrections. I will say, for those who haven't ever tried contacting prisons and departments of correction, it can be pretty darn frustrating because they're not sitting by their desk a lot of the time, or maybe they are sitting by their desk a lot of the time and they're just choosing not to answer their phones. So a lot of time you are leaving messages and you're not hearing back from them. And for a lot of prison book folks, there's of course the problem that we are volunteers, and so a lot of us are working during the day. We can't even spend the time to contact departments of correction during the daytime when they in theory are around. So if you can, though, it is important to make an effort to contact them and to keep a record of your efforts to contact them. This is something that I use in my other sort of work with low-income housing folks, is that, sort of if you're ever in a sticky situation, you want to keep really good records of anything that you have done, dates that you've done things, who you've tried to contact, whether there's any kind of response, what that response is. The better records that you have, it's going to serve you in so many ways down the road when you're talking to anybody. And I'll get into who else you might be talking to. But I mean, when you've educated yourself and you seem to know what you are talking about, everybody is going to take you more seriously than if you're just waving your arms in the air and saying, hey, this is a terrible thing. And people say, well, what's a terrible thing? And what have you done about it? And you can't say, I'm just really mad about things. So fact finding, super important. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the second important thing to do is to marshal your allies. Each of these things is actually really, really important. I was going to say this one is really important, but they're all really important. Yeah, so if you are part of a prison book program, obviously that is the key place to start organizing folks. Obviously, sort of when you have a prison book ban, other than prisoners, the next folks who are going to be most affected by this are the prison book programs. So this could, and when I say your local prison book program, yes, but you're also going to want to contact other prison book programs. And of course, we have the wonderful email list for prison book programs. And if anybody is interested in joining that and are not part of it, then somebody's probably going to write up how you get signed up for it in the chat box at some point in time. Maybe it'll be me, I don't know, maybe Michelle will do that. Anyway, so you may be the very first people to hear about this ban, especially if it's in your state, or it may be someone else. So being on that communications kind of list is super important, because people will be, sort of like these things pop up in the email list from time to time to say, hey, such and such prison or such and such state has started refusing books for a certain reason. Other prison support programs are definitely, obviously, I guess, our allies, whether they are education organizations or the prison doulas or yoga behind bars or any of these folks. These folks, I think all, if they've been working with the prison system for long enough, will realize that any restriction on anything can be the thin end of the wedge when a system starts thinking it's okay to ban books and things like that. Then it'll start, it has much greater potential for thinking that it can start banning other outside support. And I mean, clearly there's a number of different reasons why prison systems decide to institute bans, but at the heart of them, it's all about control. And the more areas where the prison has the tightest control, almost always they're going to feel most comfortable about that. So if you talk to, you know, yoga behind bars or something like that, they are going to fairly typically be supportive of efforts to say this is not okay that you're banning books. And of course, thing to keep in mind is that this needs to go both ways. Is that if there are other things being restricted by prisons, we need as prison book people to be good allies and supportive of them. Widening out further, just general social justice organizations are important to marshal together and to, you know, say, hey, this is a problem, this is not okay. And this is also an opportunity to tell folks who work in other social justice areas but don't necessarily work in prison related stuff to get the message out about the importance of prison work and work with prisoners. So talk to them. It's you can start locally, obviously, but there's absolutely no reason not to be very early on in things after you've done your fact finding to start talking to national organizations or you know, beyond your region at least. These will all very soon be your allies. Okay, let's have the next slide, please. Here's my Social Justice Film Festival mug for those who are watching. Sorry. Okay, social media. Oh, maybe we should click this one more time. Ah, that's better. Thank you. Okay, so social media. I know a lot of us have kind of a love-hate relationship with social media, and people were on Facebook and aren't on Facebook anymore because they're mining our data and stuff like that. Absolutely. However, organizationally, social media is a crucial element of, I mean, okay, if you're still living in the 21st century, social media is a crucial element of any struggle against a prison book ban or restriction. And not least because Twitter and Facebook can extend your reach way beyond other methods that you have at your disposal to get the message out there. Yes, you can email your supporters and ask them to do that, but so like the folks out there in the world, you know, sort of that it's that personal messaging thing is going to take a really long time to extend your reach. Social media extends it really rapidly, but of course, the caveat to that is that you need to have established some kind of social media, excuse me, establish some kind of social media presence in the first place. And this is perhaps the really tough thing, is that sort of like if you hate social media, the idea that, oh, shoot, I need to actually start doing that right now and building up a base of followers and stuff. But really, if you want to be as effective as you can be in relatively short time, which is the best way to manage a prison book ban, is that you want to establish your presence ahead of time so that you don't have to spend additional time just establishing your social media presence, because it takes a bit of time, takes some building up to get to a point, to get to a critical mass where if you send out a really interesting tweet that say that your 100 followers will see it and they'll think it's interesting and forward it to their 100 or their 10,000 or their 1 million supporters. If you haven't established your presence already, then your one follower is unless they happen to be Lady Gaga or something, they're not going to be able to get that it's going to take that much longer to get your message out. So I'm afraid it does make sense to establish a social media presence now while you're not too busy.
Andy, I'm going to hop in here for a second.
Okay, please do.
I know that this sounds like a lot of work, and for a lot of people, especially because we're all volunteer-based, it just is not feasible. So an alternative to this, instead of having every group set up their own individual social media brand, if you will, is to coordinate with another group who you know is a known ally and does have that established presence. And basically, if they agree to it, use them as a front piece to be able to push out all of your items. This is where what Andy was describing in terms of networking and marshaling your allies really becomes crucial. I don't think that it's necessarily 100% imperative that we all replicate the same content. We just have to have some of the central hubs who are able to distribute it effectively via Facebook, Twitter, etc., and set up the pages for the demonstrations that may have to happen, and push out some of the graphics that talk about phones, apps, and other ways that allies can get involved.
Yeah, there you go. Michelle is our social media guru, so I totally defer to her on anything to do with that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so social media, fantastic, wonderful. But the old school snail media, I don't know if that's a term, newspapers, television, those kind of folks, they still have a place. And they have a place not least because they know what they're doing. I mean, especially if you are an unpracticed social media person, you can be making all kinds of missteps and stuff like that. But journalists, as a rule, they really know what they're doing, and they have lots of contacts, and they have lots of resources, and they can do a lot of research and things like that. So I can't really stress the importance of each element of this if you want to really make a strong showing of opposing a restriction. So again, this is the kind of thing where if you have established some kind of presence in your local media ahead of time, it can be really helpful when something big comes up. Certainly, you're spending extra time to try and get someone's attention if you've never gotten their attention before, and they haven't found anything interesting from you. Yes, a prison book ban can be, something that comes up in a slow news week for local media. But if you know someone, you're going to get them to do things for you or with you more readily. Next slide, please. Okay, so the fifth element is a movie. No, the fifth element of resistance to a book ban is going legal. And there's a number of different ways that you can go legal. I think the first one is basically to search around, if you haven't already, to find a friendly legal voice. It could be your local ACLU or a public defender or some folks like that. And just, sort of like maybe talk about the legalities of what has happened and what legal recourses there might be. If, again, you've already established some relations with legal folks who are interested in prisoner and prison issues, that is all the easier to do. Having some legal folks on your side adds gravitas. Again, it's like when you are informed, it makes you seem more serious, and people realize that they have to take you more seriously if you have a lawyer who's writing letters which sound all threatening and stuff. The downside to bringing legal people on board in a really deep sense is that they often also tend to be fairly studied sort of folks who want to take some time to think about responses and you know, like putting in various motions and stuff like that can often slow down processes quite a lot when you want to keep things moving and rolling along. So I would say bring them on board, but at the same time, make sure that they understand that they are in a support role rather than in a lead role. Unless you basically, excuse me, unless you basically have exhausted every other avenue and some kind of real legal sort of like process seems to be the only thing that's left, because you know, as the activists, as the social justice folks, for the really, if you can avoid losing control of the goal and the message, I think that's kind of important. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm just going to go over, and timeline is not exact, I would say, a little bit of how everything came together in Washington. This is, you know, perhaps a fair case study on how to respond to something like this. Every situation, keep in mind, is individual, and sort of like things that we did that were effective may not be effective. There are different players in every state, and some are more easily swayed by a certain thing, and in other places they're going to stand absolutely firm if you try something. So yeah, we did make attempts to contact the Washington DOC to find out what was going on, and we found generally there was little response. They, you know, when they put in these kind of things, they don't really want to talk to you, and they hope that you're going to just like take it and then go away, and not worry about it. I mean, like any major bureaucracy making a new rule about something that, you know, they have their fingers crossed. We're going to make this change. Nobody's going to pay attention to it, and we're going to get away with it. And you know, by the time that someone actually realizes it, it'll be an instituted thing, and you sort of, they'll be too late, essentially. So we as a group sort of like got together and you know raged a little bit, registered our general discontent, and then we got down to the organizing, thinking of each of those 5 different areas. The first one was making sure that any local folks that we knew about this by emailing out and things like that. But we definitely used the national email listserv to find out if other people knew what was happening. And you know, seemed like, you know, folks had started to see what was going on. And then we started putting message out on social media, you know, basically outraged tweets and stuff. And then we sort of like came back together to think of, okay, so how are we going to, and so we started marshalling our allies essentially. And so then we all started having a conversation, both in the local group and, you know, with the national email listserv, about how else we were going to get the word out. And so a phone and email blitz of the Department of Corrections was organized to sort of get things, you know, so like try and get answers, make them understand that this was not something that was going to be swept under the carpet, and also keeping in mind that sort of often there might need to be some longevity to it. So making sure that we had people who were going to phone and email again and again and again. We started to talk to the regular media. I believe we crafted a press release and we sent that out to as many folks as we could think of. And as I said, we'd already had some media contacts in various online and regular media stuff. So we made a real effort to get those folks on board. And it was actually surprising and gratifying about how many folks in the media actually responded. We had a couple of different local television stations involved with this and interested and did pieces on things. A big newspaper, big local newspaper, the Seattle Times, started being very interested in this. The Alternative Weekly was also interested. So it definitely resonated with a lot of folks. Another step was contacting various elected representatives. And again, our network of supporters was invaluable in this, when we were able to fairly easily find several legislators' contact information. But there were folk who, were involved in government, or who knew, who had contacts in government, who were able to get us email and phone numbers of key people in various offices of the state government, including the governor's office. So we were able to get directly into the governor's office with information. And again, this is one of those strange circumstances that you can't really replicate. Is that at that time, this is in early April, our governor had just announced that he was going to be running for president. This is Jay Inslee, and he had also fairly recently to that stated that one of his main goals was to decrease recidivism, and he was all about education in prisons. So I mean, sort of talk about a perfect storm of if you're going to make representations to a governor to say, so why are you making it more difficult to get books in prisons, and why are you restricting tools for education, such that he very publicly said that he really thought that this was not necessarily a good thing, which is, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I mean, sort of essentially, he was dropping his Department of Corrections down a hole with things. We'd already engaged with the ACLU on sort of like one of the earlier issues with prison book issues in Washington. So we'd established that we were trying to do something with them. So we consulted with them a little bit more about things. Meanwhile, the Seattle Times, one of the journalists there, submitted a Freedom of Information request. And the reason why he did that was that when the Department of Corrections press secretary was trying to, defend this change, because again, the press had brought out, quite a lot of a storm to, on the Department of Corrections, and they hadn't really prepared. They weren't expecting this, so they hadn't really prepared their case for why it was important. But essentially, they sent out a press release talking about 17 instances of contraband being introduced into prisons based on books. The Department of Corrections is all about security and safety. Yeah. And so sort of they I think again they thought this is something that will justify what we're doing. We'll just give out some statistic and talk about how terrible things are and how out of control, and everybody will kind of like go away and think, oh, well, they know what they're doing. So yeah, so the journalist submitted this request, and so all of these things were coming together very, very quickly. As I said, we started organizing things just at the very beginning of April, and by I think it was like the 8th or 9th or something like that, we had already made connection with the Secretary of Prisons. I mean, he had contacted us to say, hey, I think we need to talk about this thing. And this is kind of an unusual development, but we were kind of, okay, let's do that then. So let's go to the next slide, please.
Hold on, one thing to add to this. Andy, you cut off from the most hilarious part of the Seattle Times story.
I'm getting there.
You are, okay.
I think I'm getting there. If I don't get there in the next slide, you just jump in again, okay?
Oh, okay, sounds good.
The next slide, please. Yes, there we are. So, April the 10th, a day that will, for departments of corrections, will live in infamy. The Freedom of Information request came back to the Seattle Times, and they published this article which basically totally destroyed the Department of Corrections' argument for security. Basically, none of the 17 instances of contraband in books had to do with prison book programs getting books in, with contraband. I don't think any of them actually referred at all to contraband coming in books. And a dozen of them didn't actually involve books at all. And the two most amusing ones was that one of those involved an inmate who was booked for being found with contraband, and the other one was an individual being caught with contraband by Officer Booker. So what they had done is that, in their scramble to, oh shoot, why are we doing this book ban again? They actually just kind of did a Google search of instances of infractions in which the word book appeared, without even probably looking up. I mean, I would like to think that that they are incompetent, that they didn't look up what each of those instances was. Of course, it's probably more likely that someone did look up each of them and thought, oh, this counts, and just, we're not going to, hopefully nobody will do a Freedom of Information request to find out what each of these instances is. But basically, this article undermined everything that the Department of Corrections had put out for justifying the ban, which made it really kind of difficult, I guess, for them to continue with what they were doing. So we, I believe, had already set up at that point in time a meeting with the Secretary of Department of Corrections, Secretary of Prisons, Steve Sinclair, that's his name. And so we actually, we went along and met with them, the delegation, and without, they really didn't have any defensible, position when we met them for things. And I think the secretary recognized that. And essentially he walked back the entire ban that they had instituted. There's maybe we'll go on to the next slide, I think. And click again, please. Yeah, so we met with him, and essentially he walked back everything. Here's the quest, the decision that you, if you have to face this kind of thing again, is that you can make you can humiliate the Department of Corrections. You can, diplomatically let them off the hook. All kinds of different ways of finalizing things. I think we did a little bit of both. and certainly our group was sort of like a little bit torn about, do we want to rub their noses in it in the press, or do we want to give them sort of like a way out and therefore create a relationship, so that sort of this kind of thing can't happen again, or it's going to be that much more difficult for them to do. I mean, that's a whole other discussion, but it's something that you as a group, if you ever have to do this, you'll need to decide. And I don't think there's a right answer, and it'll be interesting if well, other groups had, you know, comments about how, you know, if anybody's online now, if they had comments about how they took that, or what their position on that approach was. But here we are. This is the excuse me, the memo from April the 10th. So less than a month after the original memo that we didn't even find out about until something like the very end of March. And in essentially less than 2 weeks, we had taken each of those 5 steps that I mentioned: the fact-finding, marshalling allies, social media, local and national regular media, and legal resources. And we've been able to draw all of them together with the assistance of so many people across the states in both prison book programs and other social justice organizations. And we managed to, you know, by experimenting on different things and not really knowing what we were doing, of course, we managed to move the Department of Corrections from this major restriction to walking it back essentially entirely. So that was, it was, I don't know that we could, other than immediately refusing or turning back the ban as soon as we piped up and said, can you remove this ban? I don't know that it could have gone that much better. I mean, apart from anything else, I mean, sort of if we had just said, hey, can you not do this, we wouldn't have had this experience of being able to bring all these different elements together, and you know, made some great connections with different folks, yeah, I mean, and also at the end of the day, Michelle may disagree with me here, you know, sort of like our ability to communicate with the Washington Department of Corrections is better. We have at least an established connection, so that when things go wrong, we've got someone who we can talk to. Not least as another funny story. I think it's funny. Not least because the Steve Sinclair, who's the Secretary of Prisons, he accidentally directly dialed me. Normally he goes through sort of like his office, but he accidentally direct dialed me so that I have his home number, which is kind of cool. So yes, next slide, please. So if anybody doesn't know anything about any of the things that I've talked about in terms of the various book bans, hopefully Erin will be able, and Emma will be able to just leave this somewhere, because obviously this is going to be really difficult to all write down. Of course, you can use Google to do things, but if this PowerPoint is available to folks, you can look up what some of the other bans, how they went down. And that pretty much is it. Michelle, do you have anything to add before we, take any questions?
No, just want to say you did a fantastic job, Andy.
Oh, you did a fantastic job. Yeah, so any questions? Oh, thank you, whoever put that on. And if there's no questions, I'll assume that I just said everything that needed to be said about this. And I'm just so comprehensive that, yeah, I've answered every question anyway.
Well, it also looks like Michelle has been answering some questions in the chat, so.
Oh, okay. All right. I wasn't paying attention to that.
I feel like Ferris Bueller. It's like, anyone? David's Pumpkins is here. Well, Andy and Michelle, thank you so much for your presentation. We really appreciate your case study and all of the useful points that you've made in your presentation to help other programs out there should they become confronted with such a situation, or even as Prison Book Program has done, proactively create a plan to be able to, just in case this sort of thing should happen, at least we have a basis to start from. So with that,
thank you.
We are at we're going to take a couple of minutes, and then we're going to listen to, we're going to see a video, we're going to play a video for you from the conference. It features the keynote speaker from that conference, Haywood Fennell. Okay. So as I said, we're going to watch some video from the conference. It features Haywood Fennell. He created the Stanley Jones Clean Slate Project. He was a former person in prison. When he got out, he started this project and spent a great, has spent, he's still around, a great deal of his life paying it forward to make sure that people inside have access to prison education, to reading, and also providing assistance outside. And anyone who's heard him speak about what he does and why he does it will be moved and inspired. We definitely were when he spoke at the conference. So without further ado, I'm going to play for you, Mr.
Great. Well fed and well educated. Ready to listen to a wonderful keynote speaker and then do a little bit more networking and then go home and watch the women's final tonight. Big Baylor versus Notre Dame. So we have Fighting Bears versus Fighting Irish. And for those of you who care, Monday night's fight card is Texas Tech versus Virginia. Neither have won an NCAA championship, and
maybe if I didn't share. Let's try this again.
how's everybody doing this fine afternoon? Well fed and well educated. Ready to listen to a wonderful keynote speaker and then do a little bit more networking and then go home and watch the women's final tonight. Which will be Baylor versus Notre Dame. So we have Fighting Bears versus Fighting Irish. And for those of you who care, Monday night's fight card is Texas Tech versus Virginia. Neither have won an NCAA championship, and both have been thwarted many times. I will probably be sleeping and DVRing, just so you know. But I have the honor and privilege of introducing the gentleman to my right. His name is Hayward Fennell Sr. He is a playwright, and he has written some children's books, Kuta and the Magic Quilt, Kuta and the Challenge, which are also available in Spanish. He is a Vietnam vet, non-combatant, and he is a prison reform advocate. He is also originally from New York, but I said as a Red Sox fan, I'll forgive him for that. Because he does important work, and he has been able to find a spot in his schedule to come and speak to you all today. And I think you'll very much enjoy what he has to say. So without further ado, Mr. Fennell.
Working? Might not even need that.
Turn it off.
I don't know.
Let's see.
Hello, everybody. Hi. Hello, everybody. Hi. Hey, look. Beautiful day.
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you like the preacher tell us, right? I'm not gonna keep you long. I'm gonna keep you strong, but I'm not gonna keep you long. Okay, I want to first of all thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the work that you do. It's very important. There are people locked up that get those books. People give books to get rid of space in their homes. People get books in jail to make space so they could think. I did a lot of time, in and out. So you have to excuse me in this moment if I cry a little bit. But these tears are going to go away, and we're going to get down to business. Because like I said, the work that you're doing is organized, and it must be more organized to be felt by those that need to feel it. You're wonderful people, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk about you, ask you questions after I talk a little bit about me. I could talk about me and my blessings, and it's really an amazing story. It is an amazing story, but it's my truth. And your books help me, help others that got it and didn't go back to prison, because your books cracked their minds to believe that they could achieve regardless of the situation that they was in. Prison administrators do not open their arms to help people stay out of jail. In fact, sometimes they do things to keep them in jail. And one of the reasons why a lot of people are in jail is because they cannot read. They cannot read at the level that they need to be able to appreciate what they're learning to improve themselves. I'm working in my community, writing everything. I write all the time. And I enjoy going into the prisons, talking to those guys in the prison, not so much about what I'm doing out here around my plays and my books, but to say to them, if you change your thinking, if you learn to read, if you learn to write, you could be like a guy we all know that was in prison and read the dictionary in Norfolk Prison. MCI Norfolk Prison, if we want to dress it up. Malcolm X. Who came out, thought he was in one place and realized that he was really in another. But he led. But I know the way they talking about Stanley, I won't be there long. I know Stanley gonna get me out. That didn't happen. I had to stay there and get mentored by Stanley. He mentored other guys too, to believe in what they were doing, to get an education, or be involved in the program. The one thing I can say about MCI Norfolk, at the time I was there, they made school available. They don't do that anymore too much. They don't want you to get out because you're a part of that industry. You know, you're one of those commodities. I want you to have an education. Go out and you don't come back. What are we going to do about this uniform here we got for you when you come back? These shoes, and are we going to hire another caseworker and a probation officer? All those things that go with going back into the system. I got out. I found Stanley Jones, and he began to teach me about advocating for prisoners, and that's what I was doing. I jumped on that Corey law like white on rice. I was telling everybody, but everybody wasn't listening. We got to be organized at what we do. I don't care what it is. In a body like this, I was looking online, I see it was over 1,000 of y'all. What? Across the country. That's power. That is a lot of power. You know, prison to books could be just a little bit more or something else to attract more people to help us. It's a behemoth we're trying to get in terms of how people think of each other. Prisons don't have to be that way. The recidivism rate is awful. I don't need to tell you all about that stuff because y'all already know. I'm so glad you're here for me to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing because of your work, because of your encouragement. You don't know all the people that you help. They don't know you. I'm here today, and when I go back to visit a prison, I'll be able to say, man, you wouldn't know where I was. Y'all don't even know where I was. No. Man, no. Tell us where you was, because they want to know. Man, I was at Prisoner Book Association, National Association. And they said, what? I didn't know they had those kind of organizations. I said, yeah, they got them. They got people that's helping us. They're in the trenches. They're going around asking people to donate books. And then when you say you're donating books for the prisons, for the people in jail writing you letters asking for these books, the people that gave you those books, they're going to get a different perspective on what you're doing. Say, you helping people. That's a game, helping people. You might not see it, but when those people that got those books go to the classification board as a result of them learning how to read better, they can articulate what they want. And maybe get that shot to a lower security. That's what you did. So it's more than just getting a book and making sure that person got that book. You're helping that person, lift that person. like Stanley looked at me. He had type 2 diabetes. But before he became an amputee with his legs, he taught us how to stand up. Before he lost his sight, he taught us how to see. So when I went down there to the State House and sat there at that committee advocating for court reform, I could see because of what Stanley told me. And I can help other people see because of what Stanley told me. And the people in the jail's house can understand what I'm saying now because your books was a part of the thing that sparked them to want to learn. Give yourself a hand. Give yourself a hand. I know you think that, oh, I'm just doing it, you know. It's of no consequence. You know, I'll just spend an hour or 2 or 3 or 4. But remember, you spent an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 doing something to help somebody, and you didn't have to do it, but you felt the need to help. That's what you did. So, I'm a veteran. It took me almost 30 years to understand that I didn't have to have a drink or a drug, or I didn't have to go back to jail anymore. I didn't have to have a probation officer. I got God as my probation officer now. And I ain't been violated since. You know, I've been in this community. I've been advocating for veterans around health care for African American veterans, to do research and with Northeastern University to create a document with survey and finding. And I couldn't do any of that if I had been a substance abuse, if I'd have just been doing what I want to do. You know, and that's what I'm talking about when I say those 2, 3, or 4 hours. You've taken the time to dedicate yourself doing something for somebody else. And that's what it's all about, getting ahead when you help somebody else, when you reach back. That's why I go into the jails. I was at the jailhouse, right? I'm wearing these black jeans. Standard black jeans, everybody. J.C. Penney's, you know what I'm talking about. No problem. Come right in. So one day I put on the blue jeans. Go up in there. Hey, those are blue jeans. I said, yeah. Can't get in. I said, no problem. So I rode around trying to find a store. Surely, I couldn't find no store, so I wasn't able to get in. Jeans is jeans, right? Those are the kind of contradictions that, you know, you have to understand and let people know that jails are not what they're supposed to be, and that jails should be trying to help people not come back to jail. But this way it seems as though they're doing things to deter the effort and keep people believing that they can't cheat. Well, I'm here to tell you that I didn't buy into that because a lot of people helped me. I don't even know how many people helped me because I had a hard time believing that I could write not just 3 books, but 6 plays, poems, State House speaking to y'all, going into jail, getting out of jail. Wasn't always like that, you know, I had to stay there. I go into the prisons and I speak, and then I leave. What a great feeling. So look, I was over there in South Bay. I was in South Bay. You know, I was going to pretty regular, you know, speaking to the guys, right? So the social worker said, they want to give you a pass for the elevator, so you could ride the elevator over to jail. I said, are you crazy? First thing the guys would say, oh, you working for them. I said, no, I didn't say, what are you crazy? I didn't say that. I would do that. I would do that. So I said, no, thank you. I don't want to do that. You know, I want to be able to identify with people that are struggling and know that today, when I leave here, that when I speak on behalf of those that are incarcerated and their families, that I have this organization behind me. You know, you speak when you got some power, whether it's inferred, whatever, it boosts you. It makes you believe in what you're doing. I came in here today, I didn't know none of y'all, and I only know a few, but I can tell you, I feel you. You know, that's important, that you feel what you do, and that's what Stanley told me. He said, if you don't believe in it, don't do it. Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. I believe in the dignity of every man, and every man makes mistakes. Some get caught and some don't. Some get caught more than others. I used to think I was the smoothest criminal in the world. And the judge told me otherwise. So I had to deal with that. And then I began to understand that I have these gifts that I have been blessed with to be able, now this was my speech. This was my speech that I will not use. Because I'm feeling you, and I hope that you're feeling me. You know, and I look at this room, and I see all kind of people, and I see all kind of background, and I see all kind of strength. That's what I see. When I came in here, I told the lady at the table, I said, hungry man coming in. But I was hungry to see who was here. All right? And I'm glad you're here. We need you here. And we need to make sure that the next conference that we have more people. We need more people to speak. I mean, y'all come from different places, different states, and you know, everything is happening in all the states that y'all come from. People going to jail left and right. All kind of people, all color kind of people. We must do something. And you're doing it, believe it or not, collecting those books, sending those books, helping those people read, helping those people learn. You're doing something. You're doing something. And I don't want you to give it up. So, when I got out of the VA detox in 1997, I'm sorry, the lady nurse said to me, what's going to be different this time, Haywood? I said, this time I want to live. So I went in there detox, and I stayed in there for this detox. Went out here to Anchor here, the shelter out there. And while I was in the detox, I asked 2 things from the Lord. I said, let me get clean and don't use no more, and let me write. Those are 2 things. So I went to the Long Island shelter, and I started writing a play. And I'm in a 6-man room. They cut the lights out. So I go to the hallway, get 2 milk crates, fill the milk crates, and write the play. So the security walk by and say, what are you doing, Fidel? That's my last name, Fidel, right? Writing a play. So he said, a play, huh? He's writing a play. Yeah, I said, yeah. 1997 until today, we founded a theater company that works with families, works with people who are ex-offenders, and we have performed every year Harlem Renaissance revisiting the gospel flavor. So now, I wrote uh, gospel to hip hop and all in between, featuring dance a lot of dance collaboration with rich Latin kids from over there, kids from different schools, parents that had sons and stuff in jail. We did that at Berkeley. We wrote the Miss Marian Anderson and Friends Project about Marian Anderson to sing at Constitutional Hall in Philadelphia. We wrote Can't Go Home, a new play. We wrote the books. And, you know, I'm keeping my part of the bargain by using my talents, by coming and telling the truth, because I used to be a hell of a liar one time, you know. Oh man, what? Kidding me? They should could tell the judge, you know, you get in front of the judge. I said, Judge, I need a detox, Judge. Say, I'm a veteran. You know, I get in the whole spiel, right? But this time the judge says, we got a detox for you at the jail. You can start over there working on yourself. But that didn't work, because sometimes I would go in these detoxes and I would say to myself, it's like I'm talking to you, you know, I sound so good, you know, but I didn't believe what I was saying myself. So consequently, when I came out of jail, I was right back on track. And then when I went in that detox in 1997, all the things that Stanley told me about believing, achieving, and doing, that's what I've been doing. You have no idea. I set up a couple of nights ago, and I was writing this up, I gotta talk about this guy. His name is Damon McNeil, everybody. Damon McNeil recently was granted parole lifer. And while he was in there, he wrote, based on what I'm doing with my life, he's written 2 books, and he also wrote a program for young fellas to try to do some prevention work. That a police officer that I know is going to help him when he gets out. So he sent me the paper from the parole people, so I got that. You know, so it's really helped me with telling the truth. That you don't give up on yourself because you're locked up. Don't do that, man. My friend, my good friend, she was arrested 20 years ago. She's out in New York. Her name is Geneva Cooley. Geneva Cooley, substance abuser, active, went down to Alabama with a package and went back to New York. She thought she was safe, but addiction is such, she went back down there. And she got arrested. And when she got arrested, she called me 20 years ago. She stayed in the jailhouse, Shelby County jailhouse in Birmingham, for 4 years before she got the trial. And when she got the trial lasted less than 72 hours. Picked the jury, did the trial, sentenced her to life without parole. Bam! I started writing. I started calling. NAACP, professor at Northeastern, asking my barber, who was from Alabama, asking anybody from Alabama, you from Alabama? You sound like you from Alabama. Do you know how to help this lady? She's in the all women's prison in Alabama. And this is what happened to her. And I'm writing and I'm writing. So I wrote a thing called Spitting on Justice in Alabama. And somebody read it from the University of Alabama Law School. And they went over there and they took her case. So last week, The lady called me and told me, hey, the judge took the life without parole clause off the sentence. She'll be able to go home to do the parole. So I said, well, there goes Stanley again. That's Stanley. That's Stanley talking about don't give up. I didn't have nothing to do but to write them letters. Y'all say y'all didn't have nothing to do but to do them hours, helping them people get them books. What we do with our time is very important. That's what I told, people say, oh, I'm just killing time. No, time kills you. You don't kill time. So, I'm just like, finally, I'm a veteran. And so when I work with substance abuse disorders, and mental health. Why would a crazy man be doing substance abuse disorders, mental health? Because he wants not use. So he got to get in there with those that are using and listen to what they say. Not so much talk. I'm doing more talking now than I normally do, but when I'm working, I listen. You know why? Because that's me talking. I never forget my pain, because if you forget your pain, you might go back. This calendar right here is part of the CUDA Alternative Literacy Program done by some kids in the Artists for Humanity. I paid for these paintings, and we are now raising money not just for our literacy program, but also to put this statue up. We raised so far $370,000 out of $600,000. Now, who would have been able to do that if they'd have been using y'all? Hey, give you my money. You look like you're using. You must be high. No. I've been able to build. I've been able to build on ashes. They say in the Bible, and I'm not a preacher, there's a question that the Lord asked about the bones. The dry bones. Ezekiel and the dry bones. And God asked Ezekiel, can these bones live again? I am that prophecy. I live again. Thank you very much. I'll take questions now. Maybe somebody have a question. Okay, thank you.
Any questions?
Oh, I want to thank my good friend Louise Ahern here. She's in the trenches, as y'all know. She's my friend.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering how you got into writing plays. Is there a play that inspired you or drew you to that?
I think that our history is very important. And there's nothing that's culturally significant in American history than the Harlem Renaissance. So I went into reading more about the Harlem Renaissance. And then I decided that since they're not really dealing with it in schools and stuff like that, I wrote it and we revised it, and it's really good. We have performed at Northeastern, we performed at Boston College, we performed at Springfield College, we performed at Roxbury Community College, and it gets children involved. See, we involve children in what we do, we involve families in what we do. And then I have a project called How You Like Me Now Theater Group. And that's people that have substance abuse issues that have been incarcerated before. So we try to, motivate them and get them involved and stuff, because theater is therapeutic. It's not pretense, it's pretending. A lot of people get it mixed up. So I enjoy it. I mean, I really have a life now. I didn't even want to tell you about my kids. Look, I left my home with my wife, who passed in January. I was so messed up that anybody around me would get messed up, okay? So I had to cut out. My daughter, one of them, is a principal in the Bronx. Another daughter works in the school system in New York. My son's sanitation. My other daughter is an official in corrections in Rikers Island. So look, I said to my daughter, I said, when she graduated, I said, you know, baby, I said, it was a time when, I'd have been on your count. And she said, I know, Daddy. I know. So I lived the last 25 years. I've been able to live my life through my children and their accomplishments. I have a degree. It took me 28 years to get my degree from UMass Boston. I've received awards, but what I understand about rewards is that man gives awards, God gives rewards. So I got so many awards, I just slide them under my bed because I don't have no holes in my wall. If I had holes in my wall, I'd have some of them awards on my wall. I'm just so grateful and humbled by the entire situation of being able to give back to my community, to be able to have my family with me, and to be able to be called to events like this to say a word or two to people that are doing some very, very important work. And I can't say enough about the importance of your work. Try to get people more involved. You never know when you say, oh, they wouldn't want to get involved. Don't do that. Tell them what you're doing. They say, oh, really? Well, let me go. Let me take a look, see what's happening. I might like that. Because they might not see the whole picture. Nobody sees the big picture right away anyway. But I'm gonna tell you something. That Facebook, that web page said it was over 1,200 volunteers. Over 1,200 volunteers scattered across the United States. Now, I don't know if you know anything about muscle, but when that come together, that's a big muscle. That's, if they had 1,200 letters going to an official that you had some respect for and telling them the work that you're doing and a united the same message, 1,000 people with one message to one or two people, and you sent that to them people, told them about the work that you're doing and how you saving the state money and how you rebuilding lives, somebody gonna listen. Might not say so, that that's my daughter. I told my daughter, so you need to get your doctorate degree. Joe, Daddy. I said, okay, I'm on your father. I don't know nothing. You know what you're doing, but look, I want to thank you. I got something to say tomorrow. I have radio. I have a television show on BNN TV. Been doing about 14 years. I got 2 more classes for my radio. I'm gonna do a blog, and what I talk about is trying to help people. I don't want to talk about this stuff here that I brought out. It's only, I'm trying to show people that if you take care of yourself and show that you're trying to do something for yourself, people want to do something for you. But if you ain't gonna do nothing but complain, nothing's gonna change. Now, if y'all would have been sitting there complaining, you wouldn't be here. You came together for the purpose of further building this organization. Talked to each other, you ate with each other, you didn't know each other. Some of you may have known each other. But you came in here and you're gonna leave different. You're gonna leave different. And I want you to think about this work. What you're doing. It's needed work. It's needed work. I'm so glad that you decided to take those few hours, whatever the amount, and go and focus on that particular task. And I'm hoping that next year that we have another 100 or close to it. Again, I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Let's hear it from you.
So, is it safe to say that we were moved and inspired? Good way to wind down the day. I think so. And so we're going to close out the virtual summit. And I'm going to throw it to Aaron. And we're no longer having technical difficulties, so you can tell I'm reading the chat box.
Thank you all for coming and participating today. We heard several thoughtful presentations and some good questions. We hope you all found something useful from today's summit. The major themes that I noticed were just how much is happening in all the different places that's really cool, and we don't all know about it, and how powerful it is to come together and plan ahead, and again, try to work together. So we hope that you are going to get involved. So you may have noticed other things on your own. This is just what I noticed. But don't let today's discussion end today. Emma, go ahead.
Okay, well, there are many ways to get involved with the Books to Prisoners movement. Each of the presenters that you heard provided one or more ways to do that. If you're new, get involved in a program near you. Google is a decent friend, as has been pointed out. You should be able to find a Books to Prisoners program in or near your city or town. At the Prison Book Program website, which I've listed here, we maintain a partial list of other Books to Prisoners programs. You can just click on that and that will be at least a good place to start. You can support said programs, our program, with donations, books and or money, or with your time and expertise. If you are a new program, definitely join the Books to Prisoners listserv that Andy mentioned. And I saw in the chat that Andy and Michelle provided contact information for anyone that was interested in joining that listserv. The Books to Prisoners conference still has a Facebook page and a Twitter handle for networking, and you can see them listed there as well, along with the listserv for the Books to Prisoners listserv. For those of you who are already involved, you're already a part of Books to Prisoners program, or you're an ally and you're already in the trenches and you're doing the work, consider taking one more step. It can be recruiting some volunteers. It can be educating your community about your work. It could be gaining another ally or being one, or simply being a resource. Lastly, we'd like to leave you with the following. So as you can see, I have 3 quotes that I felt very strongly I wanted to share, particularly considering the sort of work that we're engaged in, either as volunteers, as many of us are, or as concerned people, or people that are getting paid to do it. The first one comes from Grey's Anatomy, and I think it's a very good quote. And it is, "Today, if you become frightened, instead become inspired." So don't let fear paralyze you and keep you from doing what you feel is right, what you know is right, what you want to do or achieve. And Aaron can read the second one.
It's all inside you. You just go and do it. It's there. Annie Leibovitz.
Annie Leibovitz, the famous photographer, she was actually describing taking pictures, but again, very apropos. It can suit many situations. So if you become inspired, just remember you have what you need inside of you, and you can go forth and make a difference. And the last one, from the former mayor of Boston, Tom Menino, affectionately known by a number of people as Mumbles, or the guy that you call when you want your potholes filled. And he said simply, don't let the knuckleheads get you down. There are many of them, and they will try their darndest, but don't let them get you down. You do in your heart what you know is right. You be respectful, you treat people well, but you don't forget, you fight that good fight, you fight for what's right. And what's right is that we know that books, that reading make a world of difference to the people that we serve inside of prisons. And when you're doing right, lots of good things happen. Resources from today's summit. We have the slides will be posted at the btpconference.org website. We'll probably also have them on a link to them on the Facebook page. The notes will also be posted there along with the recordings. Do we have any last questions or concerns or any observations? You can put it in chat. Oh, I see somebody. Let's see. Hi, everyone. Tom from B2B Philly. Sorry I did not get to participate in all of this, but I'm looking forward to watching the tape. He's hosting a busy packing session over at B2B. Awesome. From Jeanie, thank you very much. Great to hear from you all today, and your presentation was amazing. Sarah, it was helpful to me in thinking about the work I do with the Appalachian Prison Book Program, book project. Thanks to all the organizers and presenters. Thank you for attending, and thank you for, you asked some interesting questions, I remembered, and had an interesting insight. So with that, if there's nothing else, unfortunately, I don't have a basketball college. I do, while I will follow college basketball, I don't have any particular games that I'm excited about. I can say that I'm in figure skating season, and Skate America is taking place, and Nathan Chen is currently in the lead, the guy with all the quads. So hopefully he will win Skate America come Sunday. But beyond that, it's been a pleasure. And Erin, I thank you for attending today. And, please keep up the good work in all of your programs. Keep in touch and go forth and do well.